promoting happiness, collective action problems, public goods, and free riding. Human beings are social creatures. We like to interact with each other, even if we don't always get along or agree. And we can do more together than any one of us can do on his or her own. Indeed, there are some projects that would be unimaginable as individual undertakings. So, for example, think of the development of modern medicine and a health system, or the creation of a national train network, or sewer systems, firefighting departments, public education systems, creating a system of higher education, the production and support of the arts, music, theater, film, dance, providing for the public defense, and so on. All of these goods contribute greatly to our welfare and happiness. It can be difficult, however, to get us to work together to accomplish these things. So sometimes we might all agree that something needs to be done, but disagree about what in particular to do. In other cases, we might agree about what needs to be done, but disagree about how much each of us should contribute to the project, whether in terms of labor, time, or money. And in still other cases, we might even agree about how much each of us should contribute, but we might still fail to accomplish our objective because some of us don't do our agreed upon share, perhaps trying to free ride on the efforts of others. So these are all familiar enough experiences if one has spent any time working with others or trying to work with others in a group. Political economists and other academics working in the 20th century have done much to formalize and analyze this kind of problem under many different headings, including collective action problems, public choice theory, rational choice theory, and game theory. But these are, in a way, old concerns. In the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's 1755 work, A Discourse on Inequality, he introduced the metaphor of the stag hunt or the deer hunt on some translations. Here is Rousseau's example. If it was a matter of hunting a deer, everyone well realized that he must remain faithfully at his post. But if a hare happened to pass within the reach of one of them, we cannot doubt that he would have gone off in pursuit of it, without scruple, and, having caught his own prey, he would have cared very little about having caused his companions to lose theirs. So, in this example, no individual is strong enough to subdue a stag, a deer, by himself. It takes only one hunter to catch a hare. That's part of the example. It's also suggested that everyone prefers stag to hare, and hare to nothing at all, which is what the stag party will end up with if too many members run off chasing hares. So why wouldn't everyone just work together to hunt the stag, to hunt the deer? One reason is that people might be uncertain that others will continue to work with them. If some of their group leave, this may undermine the stag hunting effort, leaving those remaining with nothing. Another old example. The philosopher David Hume offers an example in his 1777 work, An Enquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals. He writes of two men who pull at the oars of a boat, who do so by an agreement or convention. So you're imagining two people rowing a boat. Each man can either row or not row. The best thing for both of them is for both of them to row the boat. The worst thing for each of them is to exert the effort of rowing, but without the other one doing so. So you exert the effort, but you go nowhere. This would be like hunting the deer pointlessly by oneself. There are many other examples similar to these, some of which have the structure of what is called a prisoner's dilemma. So you can read all about prisoner's dilemmas. There's whole courses that are built around understanding what a prisoner's dilemma is and the variants on them and different responses to them. Here's just a few examples. So think it would be better for none of us to build or have a nuclear bomb, say, prior to one having already been built. But it's much worse if your country builds or has a nuclear bomb and mine does not. So we can end up in a situation in which both of our countries work hard to develop and build and have nuclear bombs, even if it would be better for the world and for each of us if neither of our countries did. So that's one kind of example. Or perhaps we're all professional athletes and there's some harmful but effective performance-enhancing drug, like steroids. It would be better for none of us to take the drug, but you will be at a considerable advantage if you do not take it and your opponents do. This might even put you in danger of losing your job, losing your position on the team. So we can end up in a situation in which all of us take the harmful drug, harming ourselves, even though it would be better if none of us did. This is one kind of problem we can run into. Another kind of problem is posed by the possibility of free riding. So collective action occurs when people work together to achieve some common objective. However, individuals often fail to work together to achieve some group goal, in part because while each individual in the group may share common interests with every other member of the group, each individual also has conflicting interests. We don't share all of our interests in common. If taking part in a collective action is costly, as it often will be, then people would sooner not have to take part. If people believe that the collective action will occur without their individual contributions, then they may try to get by without making those contributions. They may try to free ride, as it's called. So with stag hunt, prisoner's dilemma, and free riding situations, one natural thought, one natural response is to have some third party impose or enforce certain group decisions. So this is a natural role for the state, as we will discuss in a moment. One aspect of the collective action problem is that posed by public goods in particular. A public good, as we discussed earlier, is one that is economically infeasible to exclude people from using, and one in which my use or consumption does not affect your use or consumption. These are goods such that, once they are made available to one person, can be consumed by others at no additional marginal cost. They exhibit what's called non-rivalness of consumption. Your consumption does not affect or prevent mine. And they exhibit non-excludability. If the good is supplied at all, it's impossible to exclude others from consuming the good. So some examples. Think of clean air. If I'm consuming it, it's very hard for me to restrict you from consuming it as well once it's produced. Or think of national defense systems. Other examples people talk about are population health or herd immunity, where we're all better off if we're all relatively immune to certain conditions. Another example, basic science research. We might all benefit quite a bit from technology and medicine and other kinds of development, but once those things are out there and created, it's very hard to keep some people from benefiting. Or highways, radio broadcasts, and so on. The problem posed for public goods by the free rider problem is that there are many things that will be undersupplied, underfunded, unfairly funded, or that won't exist at all, although they are of significant value. The free rider problem occurs, or at least might occur, wherever there's a good that is non-excludable. Non-excludability leads to the free rider problem because a person can enjoy the benefits of the good without having to pay for it, as long, of course, as the good is provided at all. So one possible response to this is to attempt to convince would-be free riders that if they do not contribute, they will not receive the good, not because they'll be excluded, but because the good will not be provided at all unless everyone does their part. But this won't always be possible, or it may be very difficult to convince people of this. One thing to notice is that some of these collective action problems, and particularly the free rider problems, become more pronounced as the size of the group increases. It's certainly harder to organize a large group, other things being equal. On the other hand, the larger the group, the less important any individual contribution may be to the success of the collective project. So if there are 1 million people all paying taxes to fund basic science research, for example, tax evasion on the part of one of them is unlikely to make much difference. But each individual is also aware of this fact and may feel both that the detection of their non-contribution is going to be less likely. If there's 1 million people, it's going to be really unlikely that you notice that I'm not contributing, and that it's less bad not to contribute, since I'm just one person and there are so many others. So unlike in a small group with 4 or 5 people where they can all tell that I'm not doing my part, and which, if I don't do my part, it's quite likely we're going to fail, as the group gets larger, both of those things are altered. So problems of collective action were brought into theoretical close focus by the American political economist Mancur Olson in his 1965 book, The Logic of Collective Action. He suggested that coercion or some other device must be present in order for a group of individuals to act in their common interest. Olson suggested that, in practice, collective action problems were solved in large groups by the use of selective incentives. These selective incentives might be extra rewards that you only got upon taking part in the action, or penalties imposed on those individuals who did not take part. One difficulty with this kind of response, however, is that in order for positive selective incentives to work, individuals who take part in collective action must be identified so that they can be rewarded. And for negative selective incentives, those who do not take part, those who do not contribute, must be identified so that they can be punished or disincentivized. Either way, a good deal of organization and monitoring is going to be required. The political scientist James Q. Wilson offered a taxonomy of types of selective incentives that might be present so as to prevent the free riding and encourage collective action. The first category is what we might call material incentives: payments, fines, rewards, or punishments for participating or not. These work from the outside in, so to speak. The second category are solidarity incentives: benefits or costs of participating or not that arise from relationships with other people, either gaining respect in the community and gaining honor, or losing respect, losing honor, losing friends. So this highlights the way in which we can get communal pleasure from doing things together and from being a part of the team, being a part of the group, and that we might lose out on that if we're not actually contributing. Finally, there are moral or internal incentives. And these are ethical norms that might be embraced so that one does the right thing because one thinks that one ought to, or because one seeks out the feeling of having done the right thing. We want to feel like we're contributing, and we feel like we have a moral obligation to do that, and we want to feel like we're doing our moral duty. So some of these incentives will be more or less effective, depending on the particular context. For example, groups that are more sociable and have greater networking subgroup organizations are better at overcoming collective action problems than groups without those qualities. So if we're all relatively isolated, don't know each other, it's much harder to solve these kinds of collective action problems. So here we can see one promising role for the state, helping to provide selective incentives to support various collective action projects and to enforce individual action so as to overcome prisoner's dilemma and free riding obstacles. So in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Russell Hardin writes, "When we vote on a policy, we change our problem from a collective action prisoner's dilemma into a simple coordination problem by ruling out individual idiosyncrasies in our choices. We have only collective choice, provision for all or provision for none. Suppose you and I both want cleaner air, but that each of us would free ride on the efforts of the others to clean the air. State policy can block free riding, if necessary, at metaphorical gunpoint. We both prefer the general effort to provide cleaner air, and we both pay our share toward the cost of providing it." So in this way, if we decide as a group that we want to engage or not in some project, we can use the power of the state through both positive and negative incentives to make sure that each of us acts so as to do our agreed upon part with respect to that project, or to refrain from engaging in that activity, as the case may be. We can make some free riding or collective project undermining conduct illegal. We can encourage some behavior by providing incentives or benefits for those who engage in it. Or we can decide to provide some public good and then collect taxes so as to make sure everyone contributes their fair share. This is a very significant role for the state to contributing to happiness and the general welfare, particularly in the eyes of modern political economists and political scientists. This is one of the main things they think the state might play a role in doing for us. In the next segment, we'll consider a different kind of role for the state, an epistemic role. See you next time.